Here I want to share with you some universal truths, some convenient assumptions, if you will, which will make it easier for us to break the belief apart in the next session when we actually go through the breakthrough session. So here's how I want you to listen to these convenient assumptions or these universal truths. I don't want you to listen to negate, and I don't want you to listen to affirm. I just want you to listen. Again, don't listen for agreement, listen for insight. These universal truths are the ones that are taken from the most successful people in the world and the people who live the most peaceful lives on our planet. These are the assumptions that these folks have come to about how to be happy and peaceful in humanity and how to get past old traumas. So let's start with number one. The first assumption that I want you to adopt is having respect for other people's model of the world. Now, this is a big one because it's easy for me to only think that my perspective is the one that matters. I know this is going to sound a little weird, so follow me for a second. I see you, you see me. But because we've never met before, and this is the first time we're crossing paths, it's easy for me to just see you as an object and not a human being. Because I'm not feeling what you're feeling, I'm not thinking what you're thinking, I haven't experienced what you've experienced. It's easy for me to only believe that my model of the world is the right way to do things. And depending on where you were born and who you were born to, your model of the world is completely different. In some places, having multiple wives is okay. And in some places, it's not. If you were born in Saudi Arabia, more than likely, you would be Muslim and maybe not a Christian. So there's 7 billion people on the planet, which means there's 7 billion different ways of seeing the same scenario or coming. There's 7 billion different conclusions that you can come to about the same issue because everyone's different. And to believe that our way is the only way is naive, self-centered, and selfish. So having respect for other people's model of the world is the first convenient assumption that I want you to adopt, because as we start going through the breakthrough session questions, as you start listing the stories of the legs to the table, right, that we talked about before, a belief is a table with 4 legs, and the stories that we tell ourselves is the legs that are holding up that belief. Well, as we start to unravel these stories, assumptions like having respect for other people's model of the world is going to have to come into play, because you're going to have to be able to see it from a broader perspective. You're going to have to be able to take yourself out of the scenario and see it from a 30,000 foot perspective and understand that your way isn't the only way that something can work or isn't the only way things should be. All right, the second assumption that I want you to adopt is that people are not their behaviors, except the person change the behavior. There's this question that goes around all the time: can people change? And the answer is yes, people can change if you change their belief system. Remember, all human behavior is belief driven, which means the only reason why this person is behaving the way that they're behaving is because they believe, based on their experiences, based on their model of the world, and based on what they've had to go through to survive, the only way that they're behaving, the only reason, that they're behaving the way they're behaving is because they believe that this behavior is what keeps them safe in the world. It's the reason why in the Bible, Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do." It's because he understood humanity. And at the deepest level, all human behavior has a positive intent. It just doesn't mean it's a positive intent for you. If I punch you in the face and take your purse, there was a positive intent behind that action. It just wasn't a positive intent for you. It was a positive intent for my survival. Jesus wasn't mad at Judas because Judas's betrayal had a positive intent, just not for Jesus. It was a positive intent for himself. And so During the breakthrough session, you're going to be writing stories maybe about what somebody did to you. And we're going to talk about taking things personally in a moment. But you're going to be talking about what somebody did to you. Or you're going to be talking about a certain way that people behave towards you in the past. Or maybe animosity that you have towards certain people because of things that they did. And to understand that people are not their behavior, you accept the person, change the behavior, is to recognize that at the deepest level, this person is made out of love and their behavior wasn't intentionally to hurt you, but it has something to do with themselves. In the book, The 4 Agreements, which is what I make all of my clients read before we go through an in-person breakthrough session, the second principle or the second agreement that you have to make is to never take anything personal. Because understand at the deepest level, it's not about you no matter what anybody does. It's not about you. Whatever they said or did, it wasn't about you. It was about them. It was about making themselves feel better in the moment. If somebody comes up to me and calls me a derogatory name, I know that that's not about me. For whatever reason, that person had to call me a derogatory name in order to make themselves feel better. It's not about me. Even if someone, I was sharing this in a class that I had earlier today. Even if a friend of mine followed me to my house, then robbed me blind, I still wouldn't take it personal because I know that wasn't about me. They weren't doing it to me. There was something happening within that person that they believed that by taking my stuff would make them feel better. Yes, I'm hurt, but it wasn't about me. And what causes 90% of the grief that we have in our lives and the grief that you experienced in your childhood and the grief that you still carry today, 90% of that grief, that suffering comes from taking things personally. And that just means in every last one of those scenarios, you are making it about you. Just like you don't intentionally hurt people, but you do hurt people sometimes, because sometimes, guess what? Shit happens. And a move you made or a decision you made hurt another person, just like you didn't intentionally hurt that person, they didn't intentionally hurt you. Because in the moment when they decided to act the way they acted, it wasn't about you, it was about them and fulfilling a need for themselves. So that actually leads us to the next assumption. Everyone is doing the best they can with what resources and knowledge they have available at the time. It goes to that old adage, if I knew better, I would do better. Think about it this way. I know what I know. I know what I don't know. But I don't know what I don't know. And how could I do better if I don't know? I had a young lady who swore up and down during her breakthrough session that her mother didn't love her. And she said, my mother never told me that she loved me, and she was always hard on me, and she never really hugged me, but she was just always so tough. And so when we did a little bit more digging in her breakthrough session, we found out that her mother was from Haiti. And she was from Haiti during a time where women were being sexually assaulted and beheaded. So imagine spending the first 16 years of your life in an environment where you are at risk of being killed every single day. Imagine how you're molded and who you have to become in order to survive in that environment. And then you escape to the United States. And now you birth a young girl. Now, a parent's number one job is to protect their child. Not from the world, but from the pain that they felt. So imagine what this mom was thinking in her mind of what's the best way to protect my daughter. Not to coddle her, but to teach her how to be independent. To teach her how to be tough. To teach her how not to have to depend on anybody. Maybe make her rough around the edges a little bit so nobody attacks her. Imagine what this mom thought she had to do in order to protect her daughter. But the daughter didn't see it that way. The daughter recognized it as, my mother didn't want me or my mother didn't love me, because the daughter was seeing it from the eyes of a child and not having the full backstory. So the breakthrough came for her in that moment when she realized there was no other way her mother could have raised her, because her mother didn't know any other way. If she knew better, she would have done better. But the fact is, she didn't know better, so she couldn't do better. Some of you right now are so hard on yourselves because you think you should be somewhere different in life. When the fact is, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. And if you were supposed to be somewhere else, you would be there. And the only reason why you're not where you think you should be is because you didn't know better. For those of you who are in your 30s and 40s, imagine if you knew in your 20s or your teens what you knew now. Would you have made the same mistakes? How much further ahead in life would you be? And just by simply answering that question is proof that you didn't know any better. So relax. And remember that all human behavior is motivated by positive intent. Everything you do is for your benefit. And everything everybody else does is for their benefit. We just happen to be a bunch of humans having this human experience, trying to do things to benefit ourselves, and then running into each other and hurting the next person, not intentionally. And then we take that pain personally that this other person just caused, and in an attempt to make ourselves feel better, we go hurt the next person by being sarcastic or mean or selfish. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Hurt people. But at the end of the day, everybody's doing the best they can with the resources and knowledge they have available at the time. Okay, let's move on. The next one. The map is not the territory. This is a big one. What that simply means is the same word doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. This causes so many arguments. And in some cases in history, war. Because we may have the same value. We may both value loyalty, but we have different definitions of what loyalty means. I was in a class and the instructor had every last one of us. There's about 150 of us in the room. And the instructor had every last one of us write down 5 words we associated to the word sex. So we all pulled out our pieces of paper. We wrote down the word sex. And then we wrote down 5 words that we associate to that word. And after we were all done, he asked a couple of people to volunteer. Now watch this. He asked one young lady to stand up and give her 5 words associated to the word sex. And she stood up and she says, well, love, companionship, friendship, orgasm, intimacy. And he said, okay, thank you for sharing. And then he asked the guy right next to me to stand up. And the guy stood up and he says, sir, could you share your 5 words that you associate to the word sex? And he goes, dominance, threesome, power, facial. I forget what the last one was, but his 5 were so out of pocket. And so imagine if these two went out on a date and the subject of sex comes up. And for whatever reason, he goes, I love sex because, well, he's a guy. And she's thinking, when he said the word sex, what goes through her mind? Intimacy, love, friendship, companion, and right? And she goes, oh my God, I love sex too. And he's thinking, she says, dominance, power, threesome, facial. You get it? So then they go have sex and they're both disappointed. Why? Because they had the same word, they had the same value, but 2 totally different definitions of that value. I was recently teaching a class and someone had brought up an issue where they said they felt disrespected. And another person in the class stood up and says, that's not disrespectful. And they really went back and forth until I had to step in and say, wait, the issue with the argument that you all are having is that you have 2 different definitions of disrespect. Does that make sense? This is what causes a lot of arguments in relationships, in businesses, in parenting, is that we have the same words, but not every word means the same thing to everybody. So understand that there are some instances in your past where someone may have said something very specific to you, and you took it and internalized it based on your definition when that's not what they meant. Think about it. Have you ever went to make amends with somebody that you were mad at for something they said? And then they're like, I didn't mean it like that. This is how I meant. And you're like, oh, okay, my bad. And it's because you took whatever they said and personalized it based on your definition. So when we go through these stories about what's supporting this belief, understand that specific words mean different things to everybody. And we may need to challenge some of the words that was said in some of these stories. I hope that makes sense. Okay, this is a simple one. You are in charge of your mind, therefore you are in charge of your results. At the end of the day, can nobody make you change? And nobody's made you the way you are. I can't put a gun in your head and say, hey, be happy. Hey, be sad. I can't force you to do anything. You are in charge of your mind. Therefore, you are in charge of your results. There's a little term called cause and effect. Not the way that we're talking that happens in physics, but cause and effect as in you either have results or you have reasons. You either have what you want or you have reasons why you don't have what you want. And the difference is being at effect is about blame. It's about playing the victim. It's about saying, oh, I had no choice. They made me do this. That powerlessness. Being at effect is like sitting in the dark waiting for somebody to come and turn on the lights. Can you imagine sitting in the dark and complaining that you can't do anything because nobody's showing up to turn on the lights? Somebody else turned the lights off, and being at effect means you're going to sit and wait in the dark until someone comes and turns the lights on. Now I want you to ask yourself this question. What if nobody shows up? Being at cause is not about fault or blame. Being at cause is about accepting responsibility. The root word of responsibility is response. Taking ownership of your response. So again, sitting in the dark, and instead of waiting for someone to come on and turn the lights, regardless if someone turned off the lights or not, whether you turned them off or someone else, it doesn't matter who turned off the lights. Being at cause, taking responsibility for your response is saying, you know what? I don't care who cut out the lights. I'm going to get my ass up and turn the light on. I'm not just going to sit here. I'm in charge of this room. Therefore, I'm in charge of if the lights come on or not. I'm in charge of my mind. Therefore, I am in charge of my results. It doesn't matter what anybody else did to me or said to me. It doesn't matter who's at fault. I'm going to take responsibility for my response and how I respond to the situation. It's not about what happened to me. It's about how I respond. Life is 10% what happens to you, 90% how I respond to it. So if you're going to have a breakthrough, you have to get to cause, and you have to get to cause now. Take responsibility for your response. It doesn't matter who turned off the light. Get your ass up and turn the light on. That brings us to the next one. People have all the resources they need to succeed. There's no such thing as unresourceful people, just unresourceful states. Have you ever been in a situation where your back was against the wall and you had to figure things out? You had no choice. That was being resourceful. Men who are listening to this right now, have you ever been in a situation where you met a pretty girl and you want to take her out on a date, but you ain't had no money? You figured it out. That was being resourceful. Have you ever been in a situation where you were going to be late on rent or you didn't have the money for rent? Somehow you haven't been kicked out. You found a way to pay it. That's being resourceful. We were born resourceful. Take a look at any child. They are some of the most resourceful people they are the most resourceful people you'll ever meet. And at some point, somebody came and turned off the lights and you decided I'm not resourceful, or I'm only resourceful in certain areas of my life, or I'm only resourceful in certain situations. No, you're resourceful all the time. You're either resourceful or you're not. It's like being kind of pregnant. You can't be kind of pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. You're either resourceful or you're not. The good news is you were born resourceful. Every single human being on the earth was born resourceful. That is how our species has survived for centuries. Resourcefulness, the fire being invented, the car, everything that we have today is from human beings being resourceful. And you're a human being, therefore you are resourceful. So if something's not working out for you or you're not figuring something out, it's not because you're not resourceful, it's because you're in an unresourceful state. I hope that makes sense. Okay, last but not least, there is no failure, only feedback. I'm going to slow down on this one because a lot of you are taking things that have happened to you in the past, failures, not doing things right, and you're taking that and using it as a reason to not try anymore. You're taking that and using it as a reason to give up. What if I told you there was no such thing as failure, or at least the way you think it is, your definition? A lot of times you hear me talk about the original design. God's original design was the infant child between the ages 0 and 4. That's the original design of the human being. If you got kids, look at your children. Just think about your interactions with them. Do they even have a concept of failure? Or do they just keep doing it until they get it? How they learn to walk, how they learn to talk. Do they ask for things until they get it? Or do they say, well, I asked and you said no and I failed? No, they just keep asking until they wear you down. If they jump off the couch and hit something and hurt their arm, they don't stop jumping off the couch. They go, oh, guess I better move the table, and then get their ass right back on the couch and jump again. Kids don't have a concept of failure. You want to know when the concept of failure as an identity was introduced to you? Grade school. Because in grade school, they start attaching numbers and letters to your efforts. And then based on what number or letter you got, you were either punished or rewarded. You were either praised or humiliated. And anything your body or your mind experiences is painful, it avoids at all costs. So imagine the conditioning of you trying to get a grade right, or you're trying to read, or you're trying to do this math problem. You're trying to do better in school, but somehow school is not working for you. And then all of a sudden your teacher calls your parents, and now they have some parent-teacher meeting, or you're being held back a grade, and now all of your family and your friends are laughing at you. Your parents put you on punishment, and you start being called stupid. And then just think about you failing now has an identity. They call you a loser because you tried. Maybe you didn't give your all, but because it didn't work out, now you have this identity, this label. And so you become become conditioned to not want to try. Because if you try and then you fail, then here's this label of all these things that you are now. And here's how people are going to look at you. And you remember how you felt this way back in the day. You understand what I'm saying? You weren't born to be afraid of failure. You were conditioned to be afraid of failing. And then you get out into the adult world and they tell you, failure's not an option, which is the biggest crock of bullshit I ever heard. Because failure is the only option if you don't know something. If you don't know how to do something, you first have to do it wrong before you learn how to do it right. I can't walk into a kitchen never having baked before and then bake the perfect cake. I got to screw some cakes up. But if I have this identity attached to failing while learning how to make a cake, I'll never do enough attempts to get good at it. Does that make sense? So failure, as you've been conditioned to believe of what it is, doesn't exist. And let me tell you what failure actually is. In the dictionary, it says the omission of a required action. The omission of a required action. The definition of omission, to leave out. So failure simply means to leave out a required action, i.e., I'm baking a cake. The cake doesn't rise. I failed. I left out a required action. So the failing tells me I didn't do something right. So now I go look at the ingredients. Oh shit, I left out the ingredient that makes the cake rise. Now I put that ingredient into the next batter. I bake the cake. Oh look, it rises. I succeed. So failure is not an identity. It is a GPS. And it is necessary if you're going to achieve any level of greatness. But in order to embrace failure for what it actually is, you have to understand first that you were conditioned to fear it. And hopefully, listening to this portion will begin to reverse that conditioning. You were born to win. You were programmed to lose. And the original design of the human being is perfect. You had no fear of failure. You were at peace. You were calm. And then the world kicked in and conditioned you to be exactly the way you are right now. And the good news is this program can help you reverse the conditioning.